Hey, it's Chris, and today I want to take you through my productive desk setup. Now, I think it's time that we stop thinking about desk setups as being anchored either by a Mac or an iPad, because I've got myself a hybrid setup. There are times in certain tasks where my Mac takes center stage, and there are other times when it's the iPad that's driving my work. And then there are other times when I kick into a mode where I make use of both at the same time. So today I want to talk a little bit about how those two devices are living together in harmony and helping me get more done. First things first though, let's just start talking about the desk. The desk is a butcher block desk that I got from Room and Board. And I have to say, I really like this butcher block pattern. I know you see a lot of these online, but there's just something that feels refined and creative about it to me. And you'll notice this is not a standing desk. I know in the past I've featured some desk setups that did have a standing desk. I forewent that this time because I realized most of the time I end up sitting down anyways. I know everyone's different, but for me, at least right now, I realize it's better to go against the trend of the standing desk at the moment, because at least I can have stuff on the wall in a certain position where I want it at all times, which I couldn't necessarily do if the desk was constantly going up and down. My chair is still a gaming chair. You can see craft right there on the pillow. It's pretty basic, standard, straightforward, but it's nice. It gets the job done, and it's black. You'll notice a black theme throughout my desk setup and actually my office in general. Dark woods with black accents and kind of the occasional pop of white here and there sort of round out the overall aesthetic of my workspace, my work environment. So the Mac in my setup is the studio variety, and I love how it's got the SD card slot right on the front. I use that all the time, but I still use the Mac for most of my video editing because Final Cut Pro has some plugins and some advanced features that I can't find on the iPad version quite yet, but it's nice to have a powerhouse in the house, so to speak, so I can really crunch through some big projects, some key stuff quickly if I need to. Now the Mac Studio is sitting on a desk riser with a shelf in there from Grovemade, which number one, matches the aesthetic I've got going on in my desk setup in my office perfectly, so that's great. But number two, does have some extra storage there because my desk itself doesn't have any built-in drawers or anything. So this is my main place to hide stuff out of the way. Things like pens, SD cards, keys, gum, like whatever stuff I want to keep out of sight, but within reach. Sitting on top of that Grovemade riser is the Studio display from Apple. Pairs perfectly, of course, with the Mac. It's a great display. I know a lot of people have sort of disparaged it. It's worked great for my needs. And in particular, for me, one of those needs is having a display that works really well with the iPad and the Mac. I used to have an ultra wide on my desk, of course, which I loved. It was great, but the ultra wides don't work as great in my experience with the iPad. Now in terms of keyboard and mouse, I'm not using anything crazy at the moment. I'm using Apple's official extended keyboard and their trackpad because you guessed it, they match everything going on at my setup really nicely. And what's great is when I do want to switch over to using the iPad, I can just shove the keyboard and the trackpad underneath the Grovemade riser there, get it out of the way, and plug in the iPad, and shazam, I'm in iPad mode, prop it up with the Magic Keyboard, and if I need to take it off and actually do some writing on it, I can do that, or if I still need to type, I can do that. I'm using Stage Manager, I made a video about it recently. Works really great. And then if I want to go back to Mac mode, I can just quickly unplug that, get the keyboard and trackpad back out, and I'm back in business. So really, really cool. And in fact, if I want to store the iPad out of the way, I can store that underneath the Grovemade stand, or maybe I'll have it out either on the left or the right and use it with universal control if I need to. If I want that extra screen real estate, I can do that. Now you might have noticed I've got a modular charging stand for my iPhone, Apple Watch, and AirPods. And actually it has a stand where I could put an iPad behind and charge that as well. But when I say modular, I mean modular. I can rip off the Apple Watch charger and either go use that in another room and plug it in separately to power, or I can hook it up on the other side of where the AirPods charge and kind of just fit it into my space perfectly. But I like this charger because of course it works really well with standby mode in iOS, and I don't keep anything distracting there. I just usually have the clock so I can glance at it and see what time it is, but also not get distracted by any really interesting widgets or information that would pop up there as well. Now, when I say that this is a productive desk setup, I don't just mean it has some really nice hardware and looks. I've also made sure to incorporate into the way that I work here all of the various productivity systems and insights from some important books as I go through my workday as well. And a lot of that is information that I've distilled and put into my Learning to Be Productive course, which I'll link up down below, which has been invaluable. The reason I made that course was partially to enhance my understanding of productivity that I already had, but also I wasn't satisfied with just being somewhat productive or a little more productive. I wanted to be as productive as humanly possible, and then make it easy for other people to also do that. So I did all the research, saved a bunch of time. So anyways, if you haven't checked out the course already, I'll link it up down below so you can get in there. But that doesn't mean I don't keep some distractions at the desk. Sometimes when I'm thinking, I like to have my Oloid out, which is this crazy piece of metal that rolls on your desk. It doesn't look like it would. That's just fun to look at. I've got a tungsten cube there. Tungsten is super dense and heavy, and that's just kind of an object to grip and marvel and behold maybe when I'm thinking. Now, oftentimes for a video, you'll see that I have some lights around the desk to light things up. I don't actually use those too much when I'm working. You know, in the past, I might have rigged that up. Every time I got a new subscriber or something on YouTube, it would flash red or something. I don't really do anything like that anymore. It's usually pretty bare and mundane and just plain when I'm actually working. But it can be nice to have some lights that produce a nice aesthetic. And speaking of aesthetic, art is something that's pretty important to me. I've got some Andy Blank artwork framed on the wall. And then also around the office, I have a few different Steve Jobs magazine covers that I've had somebody frame that kind of match the aesthetic in the office as well. And then the shelves on the wall, those are from GroveMade as well. I think I've featured them before. But obviously, number one, they match with the black and the dark wood, everything else I have going on in the office and at my setup. And number two, they provide some extra storage space for me. So I've got some headphones up there that I can store that if I need to use them, I will. Although usually at my setup, I'm using my Beats Studio Buds. And honestly, the noise cancellation on the Studio Buds is really awesome. Those are some of my favorite headphones, earbuds products in the last decade. I've got the YouTube plaque up there, obviously, and just some other kind of random memorabilia. I do keep some plants around the office and on the desk and on the shelf there as well. You know, get that dark green kind of working together with the dark wood and the black. It just creates a nice atmosphere. And somehow those things are still alive. I mean, I never watered them. Maybe my wife waters them when I'm not looking, but they're still kicking. But I want to talk a little bit more about the dynamic of having a work setup that isn't just a desktop setup or a laptop setup or a tablet setup. It's sort of a little bit of any or all of those, depending on what I need. Like I said, it's nice to have the Mac Studio that's sort of the powerhouse of my setup. I have that as an option if I want some extra power for whatever it is that I'm working on. Maybe it's graphics, maybe it's editing videos, whatever it is. But sometimes you just want to get away. You don't want to be anchored to the desk. And so I find it's really nice to either have a laptop or a tablet option and just be able to take the iPad and go sit in a corner in a chair and get a different perspective on things, or go out and hang out on the couch or the bed, or take it to the coffee shop, maybe pack it up and go on a trip, right? It's nice to have the flexibility of the iPad, but also the power of the Mac when needed for both of those. And these days, I've really gotten to the point, and I would say the iPad has really gotten to the point where I can do almost all of my work. If I really could do all of my work, honestly, on the iPad. Maybe not exactly how I'd want to, but I could do it. I've gotten to where I will prefer working on the iPad over the Mac a lot of the time. And a lot of that just has to do with me being a very tactile person, a visual person. I like to be able to grab the Apple Pencil and sketch out my ideas instead of just typing, or to mark something up. Or sometimes my brain just thinks differently when I'm writing out some notes instead of typing out those same thoughts, you know? So just the addition of using the Apple Pencil and having a different way of interacting with whatever it is that I'm manipulating on the screen, or manipulating my thoughts as before they get to the screen. It's just a different way of doing things in a way that I prefer. So it's really nice to have the option, and not to be cliche, right? But we're talking about Apple stuff, to be able to think different. So partly, yes, this is a video about how Chris works, right? And my setup, but also I feel like there's this extra discussion to be had to move the discussion forward in terms of what anchors your desk setup. When we have this back and forth, you know, iPad versus Mac, Mac versus iPad debate constantly, not only in the comments on this channel, but just kind of on the internet in general. And I think that might be the wrong way to think about it. It's not necessarily an either or thing. It can be a both and sort of situation. And we have to keep in mind with the Vision Pro coming down the pipeline very soon, you know, our setups could change completely. I'm already seeing a bunch of different tweets where people are using virtual screens to show what's on their laptop, just pinned as an AR experience. So augmented and mixed reality is going to have a huge impact on our setups, so to speak. Because right now we're mostly talking about a physical setup, but in the future it could be physical, but it could be physical mixed with virtual, which is something that I talked about a long time ago, having like a virtual iMac on your desk, not even an actual physical iMac. So we're sort of getting to that point. You know, somebody asked me recently, well, would you like to see Freeform on the Apple TV? And I was like, well, that'd be interesting because I love Freeform. I live in there. And I was like, that'd be interesting. That would almost cause me to put a big old TV over on the wall where I've got some artwork right now just to work with Freeform so big. But I was like, well, I don't know if that makes sense with Vision Pro coming down the line because then I could just pin it over there anyways without the TV and the hardware. But I could absolutely see some virtual screens making their way to either side of my studio display for sure. By the time I make this same video around this point in a year from now, things could be completely different. So in a way, this is almost like a way to bookend an era of Apple desk setups as we look forward to a completely new era, a new way of doing things. I'm kind of excited about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that as well. So that's it for today's video. I'll try to link all this stuff up for you down in the description if there's something you're interested in. Also, don't forget to check out the course. There is a discount, wink, wink, right there. I can't tell you if it's gonna be there for too long, so get in before it's too late. Also, make sure to check out our newsletter. The Daily Tech newsletter comes out every Friday, and I'll catch you in the next video. Later.